If House Republicans are really concerned about me taking too many executive actions, the best solution to that is passing bills. Pass a bill. Solve a problem. Don't just say no on something that everybody agrees needs to be done.
One does not have to be a Rhodes Scholar or a student of political science to know that every single time we see and hear a press conference coming from the White House, it will be chock full of furtive glances, admonitions of anyone in the press corps daring to ask a pointed question, and spinning the likes of which you won't even see at a good workout center when all the stand-up bikes are rolling at once. Let's welcome into MidPoint the man who had the audacity to ask the President of the United States, why do you favor foreigners over Americans? White House correspondent for the Daily Caller, Neil Munro, joins us today. Neil, thanks so much for being with us.
Delighted to be here.
Neil, that was 2 years ago, and that still is what you carry with you every day. Is there still those in the White House press corps who continue to remind you of it? Plus, I would imagine the president and the press secretaries always remind you?
Yes, it does come up in conversation occasionally. But I often remember it because I still want to get an answer. I still want to get an answer from Mr. Black because he's doing it again. This current onrush over the border, the president seems to be waving a green light, green lantern, green flag, and have a whole bunch of cheerleaders wearing green, bringing them on in, and everybody who comes across the border creates more competition for jobs, drives down wages, and brings resources away from Americans who need it too.
But Neil, they certainly are not going to answer your question because I would imagine that they think it is beneath them to answer it, and probably it's not something that they want to get involved in here. But is it not fair to say that this administration is certainly setting new standards for A, spin, and B, arrogance when it comes to not only the immigration crisis, but certainly so much more?
Yeah, that seems reasonable. I mean, yeah, it's hard to say. The Bushes, Clinton, Reagan could have been like this, but the main thing really is that most of the reporters and the editors just don't have they just don't push very hard. There's never, in a newsroom, I'm just standing beside the White House newsroom, there's rarely any heat or anger or passion to force out an answer from the press secretaries who can stand there and spin and just duck and dodge, dive and duck, and they get away with it because the reporters fundamentally aren't chasing very hard. And individual reporters ask great questions. Individual reporters can be very dogged, like John Carl, Major Garrett, Jake Tapper, but he's gone on. But remember, it's their editors and their camera crews and their bosses further up the food chain that just they put a whole damper on this. They just make it hard for reporters to challenge the new press secretary or the old press secretary, even when they say the most preposterous stuff. And then often enough, the press secretary will make jokes, and reporters will laugh, even as they're being bamboozled. In a way, it's a little embarrassing.
Is it not fair to say, though, that when you become a part of the White House press corps, as it is much like anything else, you're expected to ask certain questions, not step over a certain line, and if you do, you don't become a member of the White House press corps anymore. You're looking for work, your bosses are not happy, and it all begins again with somebody new that walks into the door.
Yeah, there's all sorts of pressures. I mean, here's one. There's lots of, the front row in the White House press room consists of the wire guys and the TV guys. Well, what the TV guys want is nice, clean video of their guy challenging the press secretary in a reasonably civilized, decorous way, right? So if someone yells out from the back, or laughs, or if there's hooting from the reporters, well, it spoils the video. And so the TV guys have an incentive to have a nice, calm newsroom activities. As for then there's the guys in front who have special privileges because the New York Times, Washington Post, they have access and influence, major TV networks. They can go behind closed doors and squeeze out a comment or two, an extra piece of information. And also, no one wants to rock the boat. No one wants to tick off the press secretary because then it's harder for them to get prestigious interviews. So, for example, if one TV guy is thinking, I got a great question, but it'll really tick him off, and he remembers his boss wants him to get an interview with Valerie Jarrett on Women's Day or something like this. Well, if he ticks off Ernest, he doesn't get the Jarrett interview. and then his boss is ticked off. So there's a whole series of incentives, subtle and obvious, that make it harder for reporters to press, to jump on earnest. I mean, if you go to European capitals, where perhaps because there's less cameras in these briefing rooms, the reporters can be wilder and more aggressive. In Russia, Putin holds a sort of massive multi-hour press conference every year, and the reporters get to ask more aggressive questions. Here, it's just almost like Sunday school.
Let's talk about what's been happening with the immigration crisis right now, because certainly when it comes to spin, the administration is putting a marvelous spin on this. And again, we go back to last week when the president did not go to Texas, the calls for him to at least go there, to at least be seen as caring about what's happening in Texas right now. What is the general consensus of the people there covering the story and those on the ground when it comes to the president's concern for this? Because we are continuing to hear, and I'm even hearing from some reporters, that they get the feeling that when they ask a very pointed question about the immigration crisis, it is as if the question was never asked whatsoever. It's glossed over, it's like it never existed, and they have never seen this kind of spin here from an administration that many people see as just trying to hide whenever they can.
Well, that's basically true. It's complicated by the fact that immigration law is very complex, and reporters know very little about it, and by the fact the administration is hiding most of the information. And the administration is good and clever. I mean, skilled and clever. So, for example, right from the beginning, they were talking about children. Jay Johnson, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, said, I went down to the border and I met a child who was only age 10. She said her parents were dead. Oh, I resolved to do something about this terrible thing. Okay, so that sets the whole tone of the conversation about children, but it's not really about children. The vast majority of the children arriving supposedly unaccompanied by the border are, in fact, being delivered to federal agencies by smugglers on behalf of their parents living in Baltimore and Los Angeles and New York, etc. In effect, they're using the feds to complete the delivery of their child from the smuggler's arms into their arms. And then the influx includes a huge number of young adults, for example, 18, 19, 20-year-old young men insisting I'm 17. And then there's a whole pile of adults in a category that the administration doesn't want to talk about. They say, well, there are family groups coming over. But they're loath to say how many adults in the family groups, how many kids, etc. So they really want to focus it on children. And then once they focus it on children, they can then focus the conversation on a complex 2008 law, at least one little feature of the law, which is actually really about trafficking. The president has plenty of authority to say, I'm going to stop this right now. I don't need extra money. I'm just going to tell my guys to do this differently, interpret that regulation differently, change my management rules, and it can stop. It's just an easy way. So, for example, the unaccompanied children that are delivered to them by the smugglers, they normally process, send off to the Department of Homeland of Health and Human Services, and then, believe it or not, they transport the kids up to where the parents are living and hand them over to the parents. The parents are illegal mostly. It would be very easy for the feds to say, it's wonderful to have the family together. Let's have the family together in Guatemala or Honduras, not in Boston. But the administration refuses to deport any of the parents. And so, in effect, the administration is creating an incentive for the parents to bring their kids up, and it's not taking an obvious tactic to end the movement. All they have to do is announce from now on, we're going to hold the kids, and we're not going to give them over to anyone who is here illegally. And that would have a big impact on the northward movement of the young men and women, girls and boys. But they're not going to do that because they want, as far as I can see, the president favors the arrival of the Honduran, Guatemalan, and El Salvadorian people into the United States to compete for jobs against African Americans, Latinos, and whites, unskilled and young, etc. It's a strange life, but that's what the president seems to be doing.
Neil, I got about 30 seconds left. Is that the last thing you said right there? Is that the answer to the question that you asked the president 2 years ago? Why do you prefer foreigners over Americans?
I mean, I asked that question because based on the assumption that he is preferring them. In the end, you can't say psychologically. But do you know of any evidence where he says, I favor Americans over others? I have not seen it. I've not seen the evidence. And, that's a strange and unique thing for an American president.
It is an unfortunate thing, as many people would indicate as well, for an American president. Neil, it is always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll do it again.
Thank you very much. Bye.
All right, Neil Munro from the Daily Caller. And a couple of things here as far as this almost $4 billion that the president is asking for. Keep in mind, almost $2 billion of it for the Department of Health and Human Services for the care of unaccompanied children, including shelter and medical care. It is something that the critics are asking. Why do you need shelter if indeed you are planning on sending them back home instead of keeping them here? The debate rolls on. Next up, shining and shaming on the Sunday talk shows, the best and not always the brightest, when we continue right here on MidPoint.